In this video, we will finally be concluding the Showa Godzilla power scale analysis. Continuing where we left off with Godzilla vs. Megalon in 1973, later that same year, Toho created a television series that ran from April 2nd, 1973 to September 24th, 1973 called Zone Fighter. As mentioned before near the end of the last part, supplement material released after the show's conclusion would confirm that this show is canon to the Showa timeline. The show's style is very reminiscent of other famous Japanese tokusatsu series like Ultraman. This isn't surprising when you consider that Toho has actually lent some of their monster suits to the creators of Ultraman on several occasions, including one of the original Godzilla suits. The show ran for 26 episodes before getting cancelled, due to low ratings. It is mostly remembered for having featured Godzilla, King Ghidorah, and Gigan in a few of the show's episodes. While I don't plan on talking about every episode of this series, because that would fill an entire video in and of itself, we will be focusing specifically on Episode 1, Episode 4, Episode 5, Episode 6, Episode 11, Episode 15, Episode 21, Episode 22, Episode 25, and Episode 26. Most of the episodes mentioned contain all of the appearing Godzilla guest monsters, as well as contain the most important episodes for power scaling Zone Fighter himself. To give a brief rundown of the plot, a bunch of aliens were living on a planet called Peaceland, no joke, that's actually what the planet's called, that looks very similar to Saturn, until it gets destroyed by a group of evil aliens called the Ghidorahs. Some survivors evacuated to Earth, where they set up roots, until the Ghidorahs follow them to Earth, where they intend to conquer it with their army of terror beasts. The Peacelandians decide to defend their new home, and the oldest sibling of which, Zone Fighter, is able to become a giant. Why the other members of his family can't do this, who knows? Zone Fighter, well, he's a bit of an odd kaiju? Is kaiju appropriate for this kind of character? I'm not sure. But anyway, Zone Fighter has a very potent attack called a meteor missile barrage. An attack where he fires these meteor missiles from these launchers mounted on his wrist. This attack is so powerful, it causes monsters to explode on impact. Using this attack, however, is draining, as indicated by the color of the belt that Zone Fighter wears, where it's blue when he's near full power, yellow when he's maybe about half power, and when it gets down to red, he has only about 2 minutes left to operate before he loses all power. He can only use the meteor missile barrage twice in a single battle before running out of energy. I can't give an exact multiplier to Zone Fighter's meteor missile barrage yet until we get to a certain episode, but watch out, this attack is ridiculously overpowered. In the first episode, Zone Fighter flexes by easily beating two monsters, Red Spark and Jikiro. They're not really anything special, all spark, all flare, no substance. One is literally all spark and flare, and the other one just has a magnet arm that can pull 50,000 tons of metal. But remember Jikiro for later, he's going to be important. It should also be noted that Jikiro was able to get the drop on a weakened Zone Fighter after he'd already used his meteor missile barrage once, indicating that Jikiro is already close to Zone Fighter in terms of power. Episode 4 sees the first appearance of Godzilla in this show. We also find out that Zone Fighter has the special power to literally teleport to given locations by flying through TVs to end up at their broadcasted position. A weird power indeed. The two monsters specific in this episode aren't anything special, just know that they're strong enough that the two of them together can overpower Zone Fighter. But not Godzilla. Nope, Godzilla just shows up, makes short work of them, and even one-shots one of them with his atomic breath, showing that he is massively overpowered compared to the two terror beasts, to the point where I'm pretty sure the two of them together wouldn't even be able to stop him, indicating an even bigger difference in strength compared to when he was fighting Gigan and Megalon just earlier this year. This episode also establishes the massive power difference between Zone Fighter and Godzilla, pretty much cementing Godzilla as the last resort and ace in the hole in this series whenever Zone Fighter's in trouble. I don't think it'd be unreasonable to give Godzilla a 25% power increase since the last time we saw him fight. Even though it's still the same year, Godzilla does get stronger after every fight. It just so happens that most times he only gets like one fight each year. However, Zone Fighter also gets stronger as this show goes on, and as for where his starting power level should be at, I think he should be above Jet Jaguar, but still below where Godzilla was in the Godzilla vs. Megalon movie, due to Jet Jaguar not really having as many impressive feats as Zone Fighter, as well as Zone Fighter being the much more skilled fighter and having a heavy-duty arsenal of other abilities at his disposal. Zone Fighter will start off with a power level of 30,000, making him roughly 150 times stronger than the original Godzilla, while Godzilla in his first appearance in Zone Fighter having a power level of 50,000, roughly making him 250 times stronger than Godzilla. And also remember, Jikiro should be close enough but still inferior to early Zone Fighter, so we'll give him a power level of around 23,000, making him roughly 115 times stronger than the original Godzilla. A good in-between, about slightly weaker than Jet Jaguar, but still close enough to 30,000 to overwhelm a weakened Zone Fighter. In Episode 5, the Garogas step up their A-game by unleashing King Ghidorah, declaring that they intend to wipe out the Earth. This is curious since they have an entire arsenal of missiles that blew up a gas giant planet. So the question is, why don't they use that instead? They seem to have used a lot of it just to blow up one planet. Perhaps they exhausted their entire arsenal of missiles, which is why they're relying on King Ghidorah instead? It's never really explained what the deal with those missiles are. The only time we see them use missiles in the show, other than the beginning intro of course, is to deliver their terror beast monsters to the planet. Who knows. King Ghidorah shows off 2 new abilities in this episode. Well, 2 episodes actually. Yeah, this is pretty much a 2-parter. I mean, it's King Ghidorah, what'd you expect? The first ability is the ability to levitate cars. Finally living up to his self-named gravity beams, King Ghidorah can actually alter gravity in the literal sense this time. And the other is, with the power of a special prism provided to him by the Garogas, King Ghidorah is able to drain the energy from the sun, effectively confirming that King Ghidorah, at least with this prism, is star level. However, the Zone family eventually destroyed this prism, and through a series of back-and-forth battles proving that King Ghidorah is vastly superior to Zone Fighter even at his full power, the two eventually take the fight to space, where they end up fighting on the planet Venus. Apparently Zone Fighter intends to take advantage of the planet's heavy gravity. Right. Despite the fact that it should be heavy for both combatants, Zone Fighter still manages to knock King Ghidorah over, and while King Ghidorah is helpless on the ground, Zone Fighter just pummels him enough times until King Ghidorah manages to get back up and retreat, being the only enemy of Zone Fighter to survive a fight with him. Very legendary. This is also the first time King Ghidorah has ever lost a one-on-one fight. Seeing as how the last time we saw King Ghidorah was in 1972 with a power level of 40,000, the same exact power level Godzilla starts off with in 1973, it's not unreasonable to also give King Ghidorah a 25% power increase. He's got to keep ahead of the other monsters after all. That being said, that only puts him about 50,000, or about 250 times stronger than the original Godzilla, which is exactly where the Showa Godzilla is at when we first see him in Zone Fighter. And, yeah, honestly, I think if Godzilla were to show up in these 2 episodes, I don't know why they didn't call him for backup, because apparently, yeah, Zone Fighter's family just has Godzilla on speed dial, apparently. Fight between these 2 monsters, a rematch, could have gone either way. Both are significantly stronger than Zone Fighter at this point, so it's kind of unclear who would win. I will, however, give Zone Fighter a increase in power because he's gone through a few fights and episodes already, so I'll give him a 25% increase because he does get stronger later on in the series, as we'll see evidence of later. Putting Zone Fighter's new power level at the time he fights King Ghidorah at 40,000 or 200 times stronger than the original Godzilla, putting him on par with Godzilla prior to the Zone Fighter series, as well as on par with King Ghidorah in his last appearance in Godzilla vs. Gigan. Speaking of Gigan, guess who's back in episode 11? Watch out, he's got parachutes! Despite being upgraded by the Ghidorah aliens, Godzilla still easily mops the floor with Gigan, indicating that it's at least the same power gap between the two monsters as earlier in 1973 during the fight involving Megalon and Jet Jaguar. But has an even easier time dealing with him this time around as he puts him down very quickly, to the point where Gigan's pretty much dead as Godzilla walks away, or at least it seems that. We find out that Gigan's apparently a ninja since he can revive himself using some sort of ninja revival technique. Due to the claw things, hook hands, which allow him to keep resurrecting himself so long as both hook hands remain undamaged. A very stupid design if you ask me. Your main weakness also being the thing you use to attack other monsters. What's even more stupid is that the Ghidorahs decided to attach explosives to his hook hands, which allow him to get a slight edge over Zone Fighter, but damaging his main source of attack and also removing his ability to revive himself allows Zone Fighter to quickly gain the edge and put the sad robot chicken down for good. Yep, Gigan gets killed off in a TV show that most Godzilla fans don't even talk about, or even know about. Truly how low the mighty have fallen. But at least the upgraded Gigan seemed to be stronger than Zone Fighter for the majority of their fights, so I'm placing him a tier above Zone Fighter, who also gets a 25% power increase, especially given how much time has passed since the last episode we covered. This being episode 11 and the last one we covered being episode 6. Taking all the established factors into account, Gigan should have a power level of 65,000, making him 325 times stronger than the original Godzilla. Godzilla, in turn, with a heavy domination, should be 114,000, or 570 times stronger than the original Godzilla. And Zone Fighter, during the episode in Fight with Gigan, should be at 50,000 or again 250 times stronger than the original Godzilla, finally putting him on par with Godzilla and King Ghidorah in their first appearances in this show. Fast forwarding to episode 15, Godzilla helps Zone Fighter fight against a new terror beast called Zandora, who has a cone-shaped head and the ability to spray something out of his arms. Despite his hilarious appearance, Zandora actually manages to hold his own against Godzilla, effectively making him the strongest terror beast at this point, since the two monsters actually have to team up to take him down together. Godzilla does eventually gain the upper hand and even rip off Zandora's tail, but he quickly recovers and has Godzilla pinned down with his spray attack, which might have actually killed Godzilla had Zone Fighter not intervened. On top of this, Zone Fighter hits Zandora head-on with a meteor missile strike, and it still isn't enough to finish him. Also proving that Zandora is one of the most durable terror beasts, because he's still standing after a meteor missile bite, an attack which has one-shotted many of the previous terror beasts. He's also presumably still alive even after Godzilla hits him with an atomic breath, and Zone Fighter has to toss him into a hole and then finish him off with his proton beam, an attack which I guess is somewhat similar to the meteor missile might in terms of power, maybe. I will say, looking back on it, Zandora only seemed to have the advantage against Godzilla when using his spray attack. When it comes to physical might, he seems to fall a bit short, but he's still close in power to Godzilla, I'd say, since even after getting his tail ripped off, he just got right back up and kept fighting. On top of that, he's one of the few terror beasts to actually survive a hit from the meteor missile might, and this was after already getting his tail ripped off by Godzilla. So Zandora's pretty close in terms of power. Once again, I'm giving Godzilla and Zone Fighter a 25% power increase, with Zandora being about 75% of their power as well, putting them very close. Although I should say that Zandora is still stronger than Zone Fighter, since he did manage to trap him below underground. But the gap is slowly starting to close between Zone Fighter and Godzilla, especially as what we'll see later in the show. I'd say at this point, Zone Fighter's around 65,000, putting him on par with Gigan. Godzilla should be about 114,000, finally breaking the 6-digit numbers, and Zandora's about 85,000. That seems like a fair enough power scale for those three. Episode 21 starts with Zone Fighter having recovered from a previous episode's injury, having a friendly spar with Godzilla. Although, things do get slightly serious when Godzilla resorts to the power of rocks, but nothing really comes of it. The fight ends when Zone Fighter manages to knock Godzilla to the ground, but I wouldn't really say he's stronger than Godzilla at this point. It was a friendly spar. Zone Fighter was just recovering from a previous injury, so I wouldn't say neither monster is really going all out. At best, the two monsters are evenly matched at this point, which I think is a fair assumption given that Zone Fighter's been doing a lot more fighting than Godzilla has in this show. I mean, he is named after the show after all, or the show's named after him. However, as we see later in the episode, Zone Fighter still hasn't fully recovered from his injury in a previous episode, as it comes to point against the fight with the newest terror beast, Jello, who eventually splits off into a second form after Godzilla shows up, forcing a 2-on-2 fight. Also, Godzilla has his own cave, apparently. It even opens up, how nifty. Both Jeller and Custom Jeller should be about the same power level, although it should be noted that Custom Jeller seems to lack some of the abilities that his spawn does. As well, the two monsters are powerful enough that together they can overwhelm Godzilla. So not even Godzilla can take these two Terror Beasts on by himself, showing that yes, the Terror Beasts are indeed getting stronger as the show progresses. We also see Godzilla finish off one of them with a strange purple-looking atomic breath. Wonder if we'll ever see that again in the franchise. Episode 22 has the return of Jikiro. Remember that one monster I talked about back all the way in episode 1? Well, now he's Super Jikiro, and according to the Garogas himself, he is 10 times stronger than before, with his magnet now being able to pull up to 500,000 metric tons instead of the original 50,000. On top of that, Super Jikiro is able to completely tank Zone Fighter's attacks, forcing him to have to resort to his Meteor Missile Might attack. Unfortunately, Super Jikiro's prepared for this, and has a counter where he basically throws the attack right back at him. It should be noted that Zone Fighter is strong enough to survive an attack that has one-shotted most Terror Beasts. Fast forward later in the episode, Zone Fighter gets a new technique, the Double Meteor Missile Might, and is able to basically counter Super Jikiro's counter of his Meteor Missile Might, and basically throw the countered attack right back at him. Whether or not this actually increases the power of the Meteor Missile Might, or just simply throws it back at him, return to center, is unknown. It'd be interesting if the two could just keep countering back and forth, and this may or may not actually increase the power of the attack, until eventually it's like 1,000,000 times stronger or something. But we don't know. As far as we are aware, it just simply throws it back when it's countered by Super Jikiro. The fact that Super Jikiro was able to tank Zone Fighter's attacks means that Zone Fighter did not become 10 times stronger since episode 1, unlike what the Versus Wiki seems to think. At most, Zone Fighter must only be 5 times stronger than it was before. This would put Zone Fighter at a max power level of 115,000, or 575 times stronger than the original Godzilla, and Super Jikiro at a whopping 230,000, or over 1,100 times stronger than the original Godzilla. We also get an idea of how strong the Meteor Missile Might really is, if it was able to one-shot a monster that is twice as strong as Zone Fighter. I'd say it'd probably have to be at least twice as strong as Super Jikiro, giving the Meteor Missilmite a hypothetical power boosting multiplier of 4 times the user's power. That's pretty insane. It's even stronger than Goku's Kamehameha, which is only a little over 2 times stronger than the person firing. At least the regular Kamehameha, that is. The penultimate episode of the series has the final appearance of Godzilla in it, with the Garoga aliens reusing some of their previous monsters, who they either made a clone of or somehow brought back from the dead, including Jikiro, who's back in his original form from episode 1, rather than his more powerful Super Jikiro form for some reason. There's not really a whole lot to talk about in this episode. Godzilla does start getting overwhelmed when 2 of the monsters gang up on him, which is curious because one of them is Spyler, who I love the design of, by the way, but is a monster from a much earlier episode in the series and should be vastly weaker than Godzilla. So maybe some of these old Terror Beasts did get a power boost. Eventually, Zone Fighter recovers and returns to the fight, and together Godzilla and Zone Fighter have one final team-up where they take out the other monsters. End of story. I wouldn't say that either monster seemed to really do any better than the other, so I'd say that at this point Zone Fighter and Godzilla are still evenly matched. But we'll give them a 25% power boost, putting them both at 180,000, or about 900 times stronger than the original Godzilla. We finally get to the final episode of the series where Zone Fighter faces off against the monster Grotogauros, who is fast enough to dodge Zone Fighter's attacks, as well as repeatedly knock him into the water whenever he tries to attack. However, after being repeatedly knocked down into the water, clearly showing Grotogauros has the power advantage, Zone Fighter gets back up and somehow starts winning. Did he just get a power boost in like the 1 minute of their fight? Who can say? But then Grotogauros sprays him with stuff, and he starts seeing hallucinations, showing Grotogauros' true danger, his ability to cast illusions. Zone Fighter eventually powers through these illusions and starts throwing Grotogauros around. But then Grotogauros eventually starts holding his own again, even despite losing his illusion advantage. The two just keep throwing each other around back and forth. Zone Fighter eventually starts to overwhelm Grotogauros unquestionably, starting when he breaks his teeth, eventually finishing him off for good. So to start off, the fight began with Grotogauros winning, then Zone Fighter started winning, then Grotogauros started using his illusions, then Zone Fighter just kept powering through anyway. Then the two monsters started throwing each other back and forth, then Zone Fighter started landing way more hits than Grotogauros. I'd say the best way to describe it is that maybe the two monsters were evenly matched, which explains how they're able to consistently go back and forth against each other. But then eventually Zone Fighter was able to maintain the advantage, so I guess he just simply grew stronger throughout the fight until he was able to hold the advantage against the monster. Since this episode occurs right after the last one where I said Zone Fighter grew to 180,000, I'm going to say that he's still around 180,000 at the beginning of the episode, but then grows to overwhelm Grotogauros at the end of the episode, putting him at a 25% power advantage, bringing him up to 240,000, or 1,200 times stronger than the original Godzilla. Grotogauros would be a reflection of where Zone Fighter was at prior to the end of the episode, also being at 180,000, or 900 times stronger than the original Godzilla, putting him on par with Godzilla himself at the last appearance in the Zone Fighter series. Though I would like to think Godzilla could also probably beat him as well, assuming Godzilla also didn't just sneak in another training arc off screen to grow even stronger since the previous episode. With that being said, here's my summary for the power scaling for the Zone Fighter show in general. Keep in mind, these are only the monsters and episodes we've talked about. Not all the monsters in the show. We're just talking about the most important episodes for the power scaling. If you'll notice, Zone Fighter did become about 10 times stronger by the end of the series. Or at least stronger than Super Jikiro, but just barely. He's really actually only grown like 8 times stronger since he started off, at least according to where we put him at the start of the show. We should also keep in mind that Grotogauros, despite being the last terror beast in the show, isn't necessarily confirmed to be the strongest terror beast. His bio states that because he was created from a fusion of 5 of the Garuda's elite soldiers, he should be one of the strongest terror beasts, not the strongest. So it's possible he is still weaker than Super Jikiro. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Focusing back on the Showa Godzilla, he had quite an impressive power growth in just the year of 1973, starting off with a power level of 40,000 and ending it around at least 180,000 by the end of the show, meaning that Godzilla grew at least 4.5 times stronger in just this 1 year alone. I'm sure if the show didn't get cancelled, we would have seen more Godzilla appearances, as well as possibly other surviving Godzilla monsters. Maybe Megalon would have made a return, who knows? Maybe we would have even seen a team-up with him and Jet Jaguar. And most importantly, Godzilla would have gotten even stronger in this short period of time. I can't believe this. This was supposed to be the last part of the Showa Godzilla videos. But alas, it seems I spent a lot longer talking about Zone Fighter than I originally planned. Even just summing up the show took an entire episode's worth. We still have 3 more movies to talk about. And this video's getting long enough already. But don't worry, I promise you we will finally conclude the Showa Godzilla in the next video. And you're gonna wanna stick around because the power scaling is still not done getting ridiculous yet. You're about to see the full potential power of the Showa Godzilla, which I promise you will completely dwarf anything we've covered up to this point. But until then, see you next time.